Hello, I'm Dick Knowdell, and this is a film on card sort assessments. What career counselors need to know about these informal assessments. First, let me talk a little bit about some of the problems with formal assessments. Usually when a client goes through a formal assessment, they often see the results as some magic that comes out of the computer. And also, they can also be a little put off by thinking these formal assessments are pass and fail, and they don't want to fail. And also, formal assessments are normed, and oftentimes the norm group does not apply to the culture of the client. And sometimes counselors can view formal assessments as too expensive, but the biggest problem I see as a counselor is the client sees it as the ultimate answer. They believe the answer comes out of the computer when it's really coming from the client, or should be coming from the client. Informal assessments usually involve left-brained activities and can be seen as very tedious and boring. Informal assessments, on the other hand, I think have some value. They generally require right-brained activities, which are less boring than left brain. They should be viewed as learning tools, not as tests, and they can be administered individually or in groups. And an important aspect is they do not require certification or qualifications. The questions that they pose of the client makes the client come up with the answer. And it requires the active involvement of the client, and it can be used as a projective technique. For instance, when you use a card sort assessment, you can usually use the card to ask the client their opinion about what's on the card, and the client will tell you about some of their own feelings. So let me talk a little bit about card sorts. Card sorts are generally viewed as being non-threatening, and they seem almost effortless to take. A lot of the clients that I give the card sorts to believe it's a game when they start doing it, and they do get quite engaged in it, but at the end of that they're surprised with that the results are very accurate for them, and they're surprised the results are very important results. The card sorts have high face validity, and they also can be very culture free, and they pose the questions that the client has to answer. So to me, the most important part of the card sorts are not the information in the cards, but it's the answers that the client is going to come up with. So the 4 card sorts that I want to talk about are, first of all, the career values card sort. That's a deck of cards that has 54 career life values in it. The second one is the motivated skills card sort, and this is a little more complicated instrument, and it reveals both motivation and competency. And the third card sort is the occupational interest card sort, where the client prioritizes 110 occupations in order to come up with a handful that are most interesting to them. And finally, the leisure retirement card sort, which identifies preferred leisure activities for the client. So let me start with the career values card sort. That's generally the first instrument I use with my clients because it's very, very non-threatening. So in the career values card sort, I give my client a 5-point scale from always valued to never valued, and I ask them to place that scale on the table in front of them, and then I ask them to sort the entire deck of career life value cards into the 5 categories according to how important each value is at that moment. And I ask them to limit the always valued category to 8 cards. It generally takes the client about 7 minutes to do that. Again, those categories are always valued, often valued, sometimes valued, seldom valued, and never valued. And so after they've sorted the cards into those categories, I'm really going to look at the ones in the area of always valued, and I'm going to ask them to write all the values down on a worksheet. And so once they write those down in those areas, Then I tend to focus on the 8 highest values, and I have them put those 8 highest values on the career options worksheet, which is a matrix. And on the vertical dimension of the matrix, I ask them to list their 8 highest values. And across the top on the horizontal dimension, I ask them to list 5 or 6 different career options that they have. And then I ask them to rate how those options fit with each of the values, giving it a scale from positive 3, 2, and 1 if it's congruent, and negatives from 0 to a negative 3 if it's incongruent, and a question mark if they're not sure. So here you can see on the PowerPoint a completed career options worksheet. And you can see where there's some positive numbers where the career value fits well with the career option. You also see negative numbers where the career value does not fit well with the option. But some of the most important things on that sheet are the question marks. That's where the client is not sure how well the value fits with their option. That's an indication that they need to do some research on that. And finally, the most important thing about this career values card sort are the questions that I ask the client. Those are the questions that are posed by the results of the card sorts. The first one is, how well do your 7 or 8 highest career values fit with each of the career options that are available? How similar are the 7 or 8 highest career values to the corporate values of your current or planned organization? Third, how similar are your 7 or 8 highest career values to those of your manager? And finally, how similar are your career values to those of your spouse or a person close to you? One of the things I always do when I administer the career values to clients is at the end of that session, I loan them a card to take it home and ask them to give the cards to their spouse or a person they are close to. Ask that person to sort the cards into those 5 categories. And then the 2 of them sit down and see which ones they both have in the always area and which ones they might have in the always area and their spouse in the never area. So that's the career values card sort, the first instrument I tend to use with clients because it's very non-threatening. Now the second instrument is more complicated. And this is also one that requires very strict rules on the administration of it. So this is not one I use with clients until I've established rapport with them. So in the Motivated Skills card sort, I give the client 5 category cards. Those are the cards with a black background that's on the PowerPoint. I want them to place the one that says total delight in using at the top. Right below that, enjoy using very much. Below that, like using. Below that, prefer not to use. And at the bottom, strongly dislike using. So I'm going to ask them to start sorting the cards according to one dimension only. And that dimension is how much does the client like using the skills, or how much would they like using the skill if they had the opportunity to. And so I asked them to sort the entire 51 skill cards into those 5 stacks according to how much they like using the cards or the skill, or how much they would like using it. I also want them to be sure to spread them out so they have at least 5 cards in the top stack and at least 5 in the bottom stack. I then change the rules. So in the third step, I ask them to take the 5 category cards with a black background and turn those over so they no longer can see the name of the category. And I ask them to place the 5 cards with a gray border on them on the horizontal dimension at the top, placing the highly proficient category card right above their 5 stacks of cards, the confident one to the right of that, and lack desired skill level to the right of that. Then I ask them to take that first stack of cards and sort that to the right according to how good they are at it. and I want them to make sure they have at least one card in each cell. So under the lack desired skill level, those would be skills that they might be good at. Under competent, those are the skills they're better at, and under highly proficient, those are skills that they're best at. So I want them to sort that stack into those into those 3 stacks. Now, I want to make sure they've done that before I move to the next stack. And the next stack, I ask them to sort that to the right according to how good they're at it. You need to be very careful at this point that they don't start wanting to stack all the cards into the top. They must leave them on the same level where they started. So sort that stack, then go to the 3rd stack, sort that to the right according to how good they are at it, go to the 4th stack and the 5th stack and stack those out according to how good they're at it. And finally, when you got them into those 15 stacks, you then can turn over the cards with the black background that you hid for that, and they now can see that there's 2 dimensions to their skills. The first dimension that we measured was the motivation dimension. That is, at the top of those, in the upper left-hand corner, that's high motivation. At the bottom left is low motivation. So that's the first dimension. That's a motivation dimension to use those skills. Now, horizontally across the top is the competency dimension. So on the upper left, that's highly competent. On the upper right, that is less competent. So what you have is a 2-dimensional view on this matrix of a person's skills in terms of both motivation and competence. So let me go through and describe how I interpret this with the client. So normally what I'll do if I'm working with a group, I go around and ask each person one at a time, what are the skills you have in the upper left-hand corner? And the individuals would tell me that. I would also ask them, if you could no longer use those skills on your job, would you use them outside of work? And pretty much universally people say, yes, of course I would use those skills outside of work because I really like using them and I'm good at those. And those are what we call motivated skills. Those are the skills that you make sure are on your resume, because those are skills you're using not because you're getting paid, but you're using those skills because you love using them and are really good at those. So that's the first corner, the upper left-hand corner of the matrix. Now if you move down to the lower left-hand corner, those are what we call burnout skills. And those, when I go around and ask people in my group, how many of you are using these motivated skills regularly on your job? When people respond that they are, they're generally making a face and look very unhappy, because those are skills, even though they're good at those, they don't like using them. So usually in any work group, you're going to have some people that have a motivated skill, let's say to proofread and edit, and they're really good at it and love using it, but that same group probably has somebody that's also good at proofreading and editing, but they hate doing it. So, but most employees tend to be really good, and whenever their manager asks them to do something, they'll respond and do it, even if it happens to be a burnout skill. So what I'm teaching clients to do is be able to take those burnout skills off your resume, and when your boss asks you to use those burnout skills, explain that even though you're good at those skills, you don't like using them. For instance, one of my burnout skills is writing. And so even though I'm really good at writing, I hate writing. I'd rather have a root canal than write. And so I have to limit the amount of writing I do to about 2% of my time. So the burnout skills on the lower left-hand corner, those are the ones you take off your resume. In the upper right-hand corner are skills that you like using, but you're not as good as you'd like to be. So we call those developmental skills. Those are ones that you should practice and learn how to develop those skills. They'll be easy to develop because you already like using them. As opposed to the skills in the lower right-hand corner, which are called irrelevant or unimportant skills. Those are skills that you're neither good at nor like using, and in all probability, no matter how much you practice those skills, you would never be any better than mediocre at those. So those are what we call the burnout skills. So let's talk about the questions I ask the client after they take the Motivated Skills Card Sort. So the first question is, which of your motivated skills do you use regularly on your current job? Second, which of your motivated skills do you use in activities outside of work? So if a person is using most of their motivated skills outside of work, that says something about their level of satisfaction or dissatisfaction with their job. Hopefully the person would be using most of their motivated skills on the job where they get paid for. The third question is, how many of your motivated skills can be found on your resume? They should be key to your resume and you should have all of those motivated skills there. Number 4, which of your burnout skills do you use regularly on your current job? The more burnout skills you have to use on the job, the more unhappy you'll be with that job, and the closer you'll come to quitting the job. And finally, how many of your developmental skills are you currently working on to develop and improve? So that's a quick look at the questions for the Motivated Skills Card Sort. Now, the next instrument I want to talk about is the Occupational Interest Card Sort. This is one that I consider kind of an emergency instrument. It's one that you can keep in your desk drawer, and if the client comes in and you do not have time to do an online interest assessment, you can take out the deck of cards and have them do it right in front of you. So let me go through the occupational interest cards. First of all, I give the client a 5-point scale from definitely interested to probably interested to indifferent to probably interested, not interested, and definitely not interested. And then the directions are, I asked them to place the 5 category cards at the top of their workspace. I then asked them to sort the deck of 110 occupational names into the 5 categories according to how attractive they are to the client. That's not to consider how much money they would make or whether or not they even had the required talents. It's only according to how attractive those occupations are. You should sort the cards quickly, take about 7 to 10 minutes to sort the entire deck. Now, each card has the name of an occupation, also has a little Holland code on it. 95% of my clients never notice the Holland code, but you could also sort them according to the Holland code. So after the client has sorted them into those 5 categories, as you can see on the PowerPoint, I then ask them to take the 10 to 15 to 20 occupations that are most interesting to them and take those to one side, and I ask them to sort them into the most attractive, into most naturally occurring groups according to how attractive those occupations are. And I ask them to give them a name for each of the groups that illustrates the theme that they have in common, and then I want them to put the names of the occupations under each of those themes. Now, you'll see a PowerPoint here which has categories. I never show the client that PowerPoint because I don't want them to see what my categories are. I'd rather have them come up with their own categories. Now, one of the things I do with the Occupational Interest Card Sort, if I'm working with adults, I would say to them, consider you're going on a cruise in the Caribbean. And the cruise ship is very small, only has 111 passengers on it. That is 110 passengers besides you, and each one is in a different occupation. And I would say, which ones do you want to have meals with on the cruise ship? Which ones do you want to hang out with and get to know on the cruise ship? So sort the cards according to that criteria. Here are the questions I generally ask at the end of the occupational interest. What themes run through the occupation you find most attractive? Second, is your current job or the way you tend to approach your job similar to these themes? Number 3, if you could not continue in your current job, are any of the jobs that you find attractive appropriate for you? And finally, which of the options currently available to you is most consistent with the largest number of themes that you came up with? So let me now move on to the leisure retirement activities card sort. Now this is one that I use for people that are approaching retirement, or not sure about what they want to do in retirement. But I also use it with young people who may need to make sure they put some leisure activities into their schedule. So in this instrument, I have a 5-point scale, as I have in the others, and this scale is in how much you like to use certain activities. And they go from engaging in the activity daily, to regularly, to occasionally, to seldom, to never. And I have some interesting way that I introduce this to my adult clients. I say, assume that when you return to your work, you receive some good news and some bad news. The bad news is that they have abolished your job. You're being laid off. The good news is that they have not abolished your salary. You will continue to receive your paycheck for the next 30 years. Okay, given that, your task now is to figure out what you will do with your time. What task will you now fill the 8 hours every day that your job filled in the past? So you have a deck of 52 activity cards, and I want you to sort them into the 5 categories according to what you would like to do with your time. And so here you can see on the PowerPoint, I've had the client sort those activities into those 5 categories. Then I will ask them to write down the categories on a worksheet and then ask them a number of questions. The first question is, how long has it been since you've engaged in the activities listed as daily or regularly? If they haven't engaged in activity in a long time, you want to ask, how come? Second question, do you think you'll be doing these high interest activities alone or with a spouse or close friend? Number 3, have you talked to your spouse or friend about these activities? And 4, which of the activities that you've listed as daily do you think your spouse or partner would list under the never category? So I think it's really important I ask the client to take the deck of cards home with them and not show their partner what they've sorted out. Have the partner sort them into those 5 categories, and then talk about the ones they both agree they'd like to do regularly or daily. But probably the most important ones to talk about are the ones that you would want to do regularly or daily, but your partner would want to do never. It might be good to talk about those activities before you retire and are in the same house 24 hours a day. But again, this can also be used by young people who want to make sure they include some leisure activities into their regular schedule. What this gives the client is a number of 52 activities that they can look at and decide whether or not those are ones they want to engage in. So those are the 4 card sorts. Card sorts are generally viewed by a client first as a game that the client can engage in, but then when they get the results of that, they find out very serious questions that come up with that particular card sort. And they can use both right and left brain when they're working with card sort. Card sorts have a very high face validity. The client is not surprised by what the results are. And the card sorts are available in English, Chinese, Arabic, and Korean. And they're inexpensive. There's also online versions available of the card sorts. That's it.